Hello everyone, I'm here with Stefanie Butland from rOpenSci. She's a community manager and she's part of an all-remote team. So I thought this would be a wonderful topic to bring into our tech tips today. Stefanie, maybe if you could tell us a little bit about what are some of the pros, what are some of the challenges with remote working? Maybe we could start there.
Sure. So I guess there are pros and challenges for both an employer, a company owner, and an employee. So for someone who has a company, one of the big benefits is an expansion of the employee pool. So not having to limit your recruitment to people who are in the potentially expensive city that you're running your company in. You can broaden that pool as long as you have the internet. Personal advantage for me, I work as a contractor for a nonprofit that is entirely remote. My family chooses to live in Kamloops, British Columbia. And that would have limited my job prospects for companies. So being able to work remote means I'm not limited to any city in the world.
Okay. Now, remote working, it's not something that's coming our way, like self-driving cars. Remote working is here. It's been here with us for quite a while. I know companies are all trying to figure out, there's no standard way of doing it. How do you find keeping engagement level with the people that you work with? And what are some platforms that you use or could recommend to other companies that are considering having a remote force?
Right. So I guess one of the main things is having a variety of different modes that you use for interaction with employees. So in the case of our organization, we use something called GitHub for developing software collaboratively, developing documentation collaboratively. So that's sort of like the basis of our work. We use Slack for these instant communications between team members or among larger groups of people where it's an instant message. You can have this asynchronous communication, put something out there, someone will respond from France when they're working in their time zone. But that's, Slack messages can be ephemeral. So you don't want to have some really critical discussion thread happening there. So for things like that, we actually use good old-fashioned email where that persists and you can go back and look at a thread later. So we use Slack and email for that kind of thing. We have regular staff meetings using video conference tools. There are a number of those. We happen to use something called Zoom. And so we have scheduled regular staff meetings where we're all visible on video, so we are actually humans doing work instead of voices on a computer. We use Zoom for everything from staff meetings to one-on-one regular meetings, meetings with your line manager for reporting and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Now, are there any stories or tricks that you use to keep engaged and develop personal relationships with people that you're working with day in, day out?
There are probably a variety of those things. One of the things that I've found has been best for me in keeping me invigorated and engaged with my work, and it's not specifically with a team member, is I've developed a remote co-working relationship with someone in Edinburgh in Scotland.
Wow.
We do the same kind of job, but with different organizations. What we've done is we found that we relate to each other's work and the way we approach our work and the detail-oriented nature of the work very well. And so we meet approximately once a week for 2 hours, where the objective is not to sit and chat, but it's actually to do our own work for our own organization. But we'll start with a 5-minute check-in and say, hey, what are you planning on accomplishing in the next couple of hours? Big picture. And then we'll say, okay, for the next 30 minutes, what is it that you're going to focus on toward this bigger task? We agree on that. We set a 30 or 40-minute timer, and it's even an internet-based timer that as long as you have your earphones in, and we're doing this as a Zoom video conference meeting, you hear a ding, and that's time to go back into the video conference, turn on your video, turn on your mic, and say, here's where I got on what I planned to work on. Here are the different ways I got interrupted in my work while I was trying to do this. We check in again in 5 minutes or less and say, here's what I'm going to do in the next 30 minutes or the next 40 minutes. And we'll do that for a couple of hours. And this even works. I mean, it's sort of the ultimate in remote working. This co-working buddy is in Edinburgh, Scotland, and I'm here in Kamloops, British Columbia. I'm starting my day with these meetings. She's ending her day with these meetings. But these are incredibly productive because we understand each other's work. Not only are we using it as accountability, I'm getting my work done, but it is a way of having someone else reflect on what it is you're planning to do. And she might say, oh, I've done this kind of thing before. Here's what worked. Or I'll explicitly ask for her advice. I'm trying to do this big project, and this is the way I'm approaching it, but I'm not sure. What do you think? But because we do very similar jobs for different organizations, we can really reflect well on each other's work. And so this is something that I've sort of sought out because everyone in my organization lives in a different country from me. So this is a way I get to sort of have that direct collegiality.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Now that's interesting. And I know this relates to remote workers interacting, engaging. Do you have any comments that you can give for maybe a company that is just starting to have remote workers, where 80% of them are in a boardroom doing their meetings, and their remote workers that maybe the couple that they have are, whether they're zooming in or if they're dialing in on a conference line, are there any tricks to making sure that everyone feels like they have the same voice?
Absolutely. The rules that apply to this meetings among in-person and remote workers are the kinds of rules that apply to having good meetings in the first place. And that's, if you have people who are sitting around a boardroom table in person and you have one or two people joining via their laptop, there's a baked-in inequality in that meeting. Because, little banter that goes on in the in-person meeting, there is that implicit team building that's happening there and close relationships. The people dialing in 99% of the time don't get to hear that banter. So they're immediately missing out on some of the discussion that's happening. And there's always this fine line between team banter and decisions being made and people who have influence on decisions. So one of the things that's important when an organization is starting with remote workers especially, is to be very intentional about getting rid of this inequality, minimizing it. So at minimum, you should be going around the table and explicitly saying, okay, Stefanie, who's joining remotely from Kamloops, can you comment on this thing we're talking about? And explicitly asking people, setting up that expectation that you're going to do that. I mean, don't do it just off the cuff and take them by surprise. Let them know you're going to be intentionally asking for their feedback. And don't just do this once in a while, but do it every time when there's something to be discussed, because that's absolutely a huge challenge.
No, that's a great piece of information I think we can all leave with. Workers that are remote have a lot more choices. They could be at home, they could be in a coffee shop, they can choose to do what you do, which is come and work in a co-working space. Can you share a little bit of thoughts of what you hear from other co-workers and what they choose and why you choose the location you do?
Right. So when I started remote work about 4 years ago, it was just a bit before I had gotten the job I have now, I was working 100% of the time from my home. I had a dedicated little office space, fantastic. But over time, not being exposed to other humans got to be a bit of a drag. So I enjoy it sometimes, other times I don't. So at that point, I started using co-working space at Kamloops Innovation. At some point when I got this job that I have now, I'm lucky that my organization actually pays for rent for a single office for me in this co-working place. But sometimes, for me and for others as well, when I want a change of scenery, to focus on a certain kind of task, I might go to a coffee shop that has internet and welcomes, doesn't mind people cracking open their laptops at a big table, spend a couple of hours there. One of my colleagues, for example, for 2 or 3 years, has been almost entirely working between his home office and coffee shops because he works really well there. Recently, he's gotten some co-working space at a library nearby that has some philosophies that are aligned with the kind of work he does. So co-working spaces, home, coffee shops. Some people use entirely one of those things. What I like for myself is actually using a combination based on the nature of the work I'm doing, and even sometimes within the space I'm in. I might use my office, or I might go sit at the big co-working table where there are other people working, just to have those connections with other people.
Well, that's great. Stephanie, I got to thank you hugely. I'm sure this has helped everyone that is either co-working right now, thinking about it, or employers that are considering expanding where they're reaching to for the next key employee. It's been great having you on Tech Tips, and have a wonderful rest of your day working remotely.
Thank you, John, and thank you everyone else for listening.